showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with director Mark Shapiro. He is one of two directors of the new film Downwind. It is a documentary that is really pretty important. It is all about the many nuclear tests that have taken place in the U.S. and the effect that it's had on the environment and moreover on the people that live in the areas just downwind of those nuclear tests. The film will be having its premiere screening at Slamdance down in Park City, Utah on January 23rd, 2023. If you can make it, I highly recommend that you do so. Otherwise, keep an eye out and I will be sure to give updates on where it is available, where you can find it, what other festivals it is at. By the way, this is all one word, Downwind. It is not the two-word documentary about Ontario's wind farms. So just to keep that in mind. All right, enjoy the interview and please check out Downwind when it is available near you. I am so excited to talk to you about Downwind, but I'm so curious about your past. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into filmmaking?
And actually specifically with my co-director, Douglas Brian Miller, we worked together in 2005, as far back even before that, on making mini docs. So we did a lot of mini documentary films for a lot of different clients like Starbucks and PricewaterhouseCoopers. We did these interesting little tidbits, things that talked about the company, the corporate structure and things within the companies. And so we love the idea of storytelling. So we really tried to dig deep into this. We were working with an organization called the Monster Diversity Leadership Program. And this is a program that went around to campuses all over the country for Monster.com with high-level rising juniors in college, change makers, and we really got into the storytelling of those people. And so it was on more of a corporate level, but we really got into the idea of telling great stories, and that was something that was really important to us.
And how did you and Douglas Brian Miller even connect and start doing this?
We connected through Monster.com. That was where we were both. I was working with media, and Doug was doing sort of DP/director stuff for videos and things like that. And so that's how we met. And we've done a lot of projects that were, in addition to the corporate ones, we did some fun little individual ones and worked on a couple of things together before we really got going on this one. So obviously his years and years and years of DP experience and directing experience in my production and directing experience has a lot to do with that. Hopefully the success of a film when you have two directors who are working so closely together, know each other so well.
When did the idea for Downwind come to you guys?
It was a few years ago. We'd had cancer. It impacted both of our families and, trying to figure out and research the development of cancer, how it happens. It obviously impacts everyone. Everyone is impacted by cancer. It's one of those unfortunate things. And I think we were interested in sort of learning more about how, the different types of developments of cancer and how it impacts our country. In some of our research, then we kind of did sort of a zoom in and using a lens metaphor on what happened in St. George, Utah with the film The Conqueror. That was almost our initial sort of foray into this because we'd read about the cancer that had allegedly impacted that production in St. George. And the fact that it was John Wayne was interesting to us because we'd heard through that People magazine article that we found from 1980 that talked to, he, in the article that said, did America kill John Wayne? And that was interesting. Well, we looked into that. He knew he was a big smoker and things like that, but did his time on the Conqueror impact production? And did the production impact cancer? And so we looked into that, and as we delved deeper into the research and seeing the not only John Wayne, but the director of the film and the co-stars and key grips and other people on the production had also allegedly suffered and been exposed to cancer on the Conqueror. we thought that was interesting. And then the final note about John Wayne was we sort of saw John Wayne as almost an iconic representation of America. He felt like the all-American, brazen, brash, an individual that was, bigger than life. And this obviously is a disease that doesn't recognize, it doesn't matter who you are, you can be impacted by it. So John Wayne is sort of an iconic symbol of the way that cancer can impact all Americans, all global citizens.
It's so sad as well that so many of the people that are affected are Native Americans, and just that it's like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because it's taking place someplace else, taking place in a wasteland, quote unquote, and who cares about the people that are there anyway? They shouldn't be there, basically, is what the attitude feels like.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So as we look further and realize that the land on which they were doing their testing was deeded Shoshone Nation territory. And we actually reached out to that community and found Ian Zabarte, the principal man of the Western bands of the Shoshone Nation of Indians. And Ian became an important part of this film for that very reason. Claudia Peterson at the beginning of the film talks about how the detonations impacted the quote-unquote low-use segment of the population. And we were thinking to ourselves, what does that mean? And that became a deeper sort of discussion about how can anybody be referred to as that disrespectfully? And even further, as we looked, going back to The Conqueror for a moment, when that production was impacted by Dirty Harry was the name of the blast. It was an atomic blast that had taken place before production. They were surprised by the way the winds had shifted and then had to warn the people in St. George. What we found interesting was, they were warning them of something. And so if it didn't go to St. George, it goes somewhere else. And what about those other hundreds of detonations that had taken place? Were people being warned? Was this something that, was part of what they were doing? They knew that there was something going on. So the fact that it's going to go somewhere. So obviously it was devastating to St. George, but it's also devastating to any part of the environment where the fallout travels.
Well, and I knew that they had set off some atomic bombs. I didn't realize that it was 924 atomic bombs over like a 50-year period.
Technically, it's 928. 828 of those were done underground, and 100 of them were done detonated above ground, sometimes from balloons or towers. And it is kind of a remarkable number. And just about everybody that we come into contact with is surprised by the number of detonations. We learned about Alamogordo or Trinity. We learned about the Manhattan Project as students and things like that growing up. But I don't think this was something that people were really, really aware of. And that, again, to us was eye-opening. And so we embarked on this journey of discovery to figure out, okay, 928 nuclear detonations in Nevada, in this one location of Nevada. Pretty small, if you think of it in terms of the size of the country and everything, it was not a huge area, but they detonated this number of bombs, and that was troubling to us and also worth more consideration.
The effects of radiation seem to have been lost on us over the years. I don't know what shifted, but when I was growing up, radiation was a major concern. Nuclear war was a major concern. And now in films, it's like, oh, this nuclear bomb went off 20 miles off the coast. I'm like, well, that's a really big deal. This is not something to be trifled with. And, showing the effects of these blasts in the immediate. And then I love the metaphor of all of the generations after are also downwind. It's not just the immediate people. It's not just the immediate place, but it's all of those people that get affected years and years after that.
The news cycle is at 24 hours, maybe, and we move on to the next thing, whatever it is. And it's surprising to us how little was known, to your point, and that it had been going on for so long, 40 years, 1951 to 1992, technically. And I think it's another surprise. A lot of the people that we interviewed, I have a book, The United States Nuclear Tests. It was something released from the Department of Energy, United States of America Department of Energy, that was handed out to journalists. And Keith Rogers, who was one of the people we interviewed for this film, gave this to me, or loaned it to me. And it goes through every one of the tests. And they told us about it. And they also had those films that were created through Lookout Mountain Labs that talked about that we'd seen, like maybe in newsreels or footage. It's all there. But like you said, it sort of falls off the 24-hour news cycle because something else comes into play, whether that's entertainment or something else takes the front page of the major news outlets. What we wanted to do with this film was to make sure that people of all political backgrounds would be interested in talking about, because, you know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, an independent, a libertarian, we felt like it was important for people to be able to sit in the same room and watch this movie. And because it's something we don't see as political, we see it as something as newsworthy and interesting. As Americans, I think we all appreciate what we get to do. And part of that is due to being a quote unquote superpower. But what's the global cost of being a superpower? What is the global responsibility of being a superpower? These are issues that we wanted to raise consciousness about. And that was part of the, you know, some of the reasons why we wanted this story to be talked about. Let people talk about it, you know, and ask those questions.
Well, even stepping back a little bit, I mean, how do you even approach shaping this story, researching this story, and coming up with this wonderful documentary?
We initially were looking at what had gone on in St. George and what had happened into the Shoshone Nation. And then things, as we look to the number of people that we wanted to talk to, you know, we have a list of hundreds of people that, you know, were on our list, a wish list that we could talk to. And we really wanted to talk to people who were most impacted by this and who could really raise a voice, who wouldn't, in the past, hadn't necessarily raised a voice about what had been happening, or through their communities. They're the people that were the ones who were speaking. That's why we initially went to Claudia Peterson, who's a downwinder from St. George. And then we talked to Mary Dixon, who's also a downwinder from Salt Lake. And then Ian Zabarte was critical, as you mentioned, to the film as a Native American, because he could speak about the deeded land that was still being restricted, to this day is still restricted. Darlene Graham, who is a Shoshone Nation healer, had witnessed the blast. You know, she said she grew up hearing this great big boom they could hear it. She lived in Duckwater, Nevada, and they would go outside and they would look up and see this mushroom cloud. Imagine that. And again, looking deeper as we researched and looked at this incredible collection of still and film of the detonations, and you can't take your eyes off of it. It is something so powerful when you see this, you know, this mushroom cloud. It's the power of it. So initially we thought about, okay, how can we tell the story that raises consciousness? You know, we're not supposed to create dialogue about what's happening, and we don't feel like it's a closed story, that it's continually changing. A lot of the people that we got in the film as for interviews or a narrator, Martin Sheen, were people that we saw as critical, because Martin Sheen was with Ian Zabarte at the test site. And so you could say that's coincidental, but it's all sort of interrelated. You know, Ian is connected to Mary. He happens to know Mary, and he knows Claudia, but they know each other from places that they've gone throughout the world protesting, testing. The other thing we also wanted to really talk about with this film was we looked at the direction, was the idea of activist patriots in the United States. And again, this is not something that is necessarily related to, you know, a Democrat or Republican or independent or any other branch of how you feel. It just becomes something about, you know, your thoughts about how it's impacting you. Everybody has a story to tell. We wanted to kind of make sure that they were able to tell their story. Those folks from those communities, Native Americans, the community of Latter-day, you know, the Latter-day Saint or Mormon community, the individuals who lived sort of ranchers, and the individuals didn't really speak up against government. And so they became, as Claudia says, almost perfect victims of this, where, you know, this could happen and nobody's saying anything. So it was kind of what we wanted to do with this film, is to get it out there and then almost take a step back and let them tell their story.
I know that you've done the smaller documentaries in the past, but to do this feature, I mean, you haven't directed a feature documentary before, have you?
Doug has directed a couple features before this, and I had started as a producer for this, and then, I mean, it became such a passion over the last few years that not only was I, you know, working with writing, but also direction. So that's why we're co-directors. But Doug has a Netflix documentary now. It's called Why Did You Kill Me? It's on Netflix. He also did one on comics. So he has experience with that, and he's constantly actually shooting documentaries in his other world, his other life, his day job. To take on a documentary of this scope was a massive challenge on so many levels, especially this is, we were getting into early research and things like that, obviously before the pandemic, but then to get into the pandemic, having to shoot with a skeleton crew, but again, capturing things, I think beautifully. I think it was really important for us to show the beauty of the land too. Land and soil, there's nothing more important. And so when you go to that part of the country, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, it's almost like the landscape speaks for itself. It's remarkably beautiful. When you juxtapose that with the mushroom cloud, it's awe-inspiring and in a way that's hard to explain, because you see the power of something in one area, but just all of that sort of coming together helped us put the story together.
Did doing this during the pandemic, did that also increase your reliance on the stock footage? Not to complain, because I think the stock footage is fantastic and you use it very judiciously.
I think that we like the balance of stock footage versus with ours, because we feel like it had its place. I don't think the pandemic really stopped us from that, because we were able to get out and travel, throughout the West, just, telling the two of us or with a very small crew, sometimes a few of us. The stock footage that we used, most of it from Lookout Mountain Lab, tells its own story. We almost didn't have to, add too much to the narration, because it tells a story. And whether you view that as propaganda or news is sort of in the eye of, we wanted to put it out there so people saw that the way things were positioned was important, because I feel like that was also part of what was going on with the detonations. Surprised that there were so many going on. Would it be surprising for you to hear at Lookout Mountain that they made thousands and thousands of these films and stills, and employed Disney animators, and it was one of the largest studios in Hollywood at the time, Lookout Mountain Labs. So that became another interesting thing for us, because we thought we knew everything. And here we come across this incredible studio in Laurel Canyon, it's in Hollywood, and it was making the Cold War dialogue that was sort of controlling the narrative of the Cold War dialogue from a United States perspective, films made by Department of Defense and Atomic Energy Commission that were educational. And I think they viewed that as educational. And by the way, in some of the films, like in St. George, we spoke to people in St. George that talked, they knew some of the people that were in the film, some of the extras that you see. They weren't all actors, but they were in there shooting. And so they were chronicling what was going on. But there definitely was a narrative, and there definitely was a POV, and they were utilizing top-notch directors to tell the story. So that becomes another level of what was going on with the detonations. It's one thing to have science and researchers conducting what they did, but there's also a quote-unquote media or marketing side to this. That was a powerful, powerful machine.
Well, speaking of media, I'm hoping that the synchronicity of Downwind and then the Oppenheimer film are going to help you out. And that idea of how awesome the atomic blast is without the discussion of the radiation that follows is useless.
This is another example, and you're bringing up this a lot, in which you asked about how the film came to be. There were so many, again, I don't want to call them coincidences, because I feel like things were interrelated, but the fact that Oppenheimer was coming out, and we didn't know about this when we started the film. We didn't know about Oppenheimer. And then the fact Matthew Modine, who is in the movie, is our executive producer. And we're hoping that there will be some timing and connections between those films, because obviously it's a little bit different, because that's more of a scripted piece that they've created. Ours is a full documentary, but still does tell a story. And then, by the way, the branches that we went off into Oppenheimer and into Edward Teller and into, Truman and Eisenhower and, the Russian leaders and things like that. It's all very, very interesting. And we could have made several different films, and maybe we're looking at doing something similar with our next film that's somewhat related. There are so many little coincidences or things that happened that were great and really fed into the creation of our material.
So when did you get picture lock for this, or is it still a little bit in progress?
We're still in progress. We're premiering at Slamdance, and then we're working with a couple of different potential distributor partners. I can't say more than that yet. So we'll find out exactly when that'll happen, when release will happen. But our website and our social media, which should be updated with all the information of that, and hopefully we'll have more as we kind of get into the release of the film. So Slamdance was important to us as a place to release, because it's a film festival that we really believe in. It's a filmmakers festival for filmmakers, and it's in Utah. And the timing was remarkable. The fact that several of our people that are in the film can drive to Park City to be able to take part in questions and answers. And also we Slamdance has given us a 1-hour panel on the same day to sort of talk about, what's next and what is a downwinder and what can we do next? Like what's next on the horizon? So we're really thrilled about that. So that Slamdance becomes our first, hopefully of many places that we're going to be showcasing before it's available on another platform.
I don't like to throw this word around, the word important, but this feels like a very important film. And this is one of those films that I really feel like everybody should see. Everybody who's not just a U.S. citizen, but just everyone around the world just needs to see this and understand what has come before and where we're at now. And then to your point, where are we going from here? Because it is just such a huge story that I just don't think a lot of people really understand. And I'm so glad that you were able to put it in such a plain, unadorned, very easy to digest way in a super effective and gorgeous documentary.
We hope that people do see it. We hope people do talk about it. And I think it's interesting about a film, position this film to what it is now, to going from, like we said, the zoom out to the activist patriot to the hopeful conclusion at the end, where we talk about what Ian has meant to the world, what Claudia has meant to the world, what Mary has meant to the world. Those are things that are really important to us. The idea that this is an ongoing thing, like you mentioned, it's not only impacting future generations, but obviously the past generations. And there's this whole debate about RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which is a congressional act that is supposed to sunset next year. And that protects just 3 states and remote counties in 3 states of Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. But we feel like we're all downwinders, and not only do we feel like the legislation should be increased and the amount of time increased, but also just the expansion of funding, $50,000, a one-time lump sum of $50,000 is what they call it. And that to us is something that as Americans, we need to take care of each other. And hopefully that also, that message gets across and the people can see that it really is important because we're supporting each other. The RECA Act was something that we obviously learned about and we go into detail about it in the film. I don't think people, obviously most are not aware of the detonations, but then what happens afterwards? How do we take care of each other after something, this significant occurs? And it's through education and legislation and funding.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for making this film. Please thank your co-director for me as well. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
I appreciate your time too and your thoughts about it. And it's, if it hits you the way we hope it did, then and that's an indication of what others will take from this film, then we're thrilled. And it's what we want to do, raise consciousness. And I really, really thank you for your time.
I'm gonna keep my bag, I'm gonna keep my sins. I'm staying downwind, I'm staying downwind. I can hear the dogs, I can hear the chains, and the blood gangs up and I can feel their veins. I'm staying downwind, I'm staying downwind, I'm staying downwind. I can't go back to the box again. There was a big black soul and it took me in. I'm staying downwind, I'm staying downwind, I'm staying downwind. Oh, someday I'm gonna show you how it all went down. Oh, someday I'm gonna show you how it all went down. sky and the sun out in a frying pan. And if it is a wall, I will go down like a man. I'm staying downwind. I'm staying downwind. I'm staying downwind. I can hear the dogs, I can hear the chains, and the blood gets something I can see their veins. I'm staying downwind. I'm staying downwind. I'm staying downwind.